Good morning and welcome to the devotion for August the 31st. It's the last day of the month, and tomorrow we begin the last third of 2020. Many of us are excited to get this year over with all of the challenges that we faced with the pandemic, with a lot of unrest in our country, with many people struggling following natural disasters, forest fires and flooding and hurricanes and tornadoes. A lot of challenges. We've had lots of rain here over the last 12 to 18 hours, and we have a little bit of a reprieve right now as the sun has come out. But I was reminded of some of Frederick Buechner's writings as the rains were pouring down earlier this morning, and wanted to read a little bit from one of his devotions as he thought about Noah and Noah's experience. So I want you to listen to these words. The waters had all drained off and the ground was dry again when God hung a rainbow in the sky to remind him that he'd promised that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. The way he explained it to Noah, I'll look upon it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature that's upon the earth. In one way, then, it gave Noah a warm feeling to see the rainbow up there, but in another way it gave him an uneasy twinge. If God needed the rainbow as a reminder, he thought, that could mean that if someday God didn't happen to look in the right direction or had something else on his mind, he might forget his promise, and the heavy drops would start pattering down on the roof a second time. Noah could never forget the first time, how little by little the waters had risen, first just spreading in over the kitchen linoleum and trickling down the cellar stairs, but eventually floating newspapers and family photographs off tables and peeling wallpaper off walls until people were driven to the rooftops where they sat wrapped in blankets with their transistor radios on their laps, looking up for a break in the clouds and reassuring each other that this must be the clearing shower at last. He remembered the animals he'd had to leave behind, the old sow with her flaxen lashes squealing on top of a hen house as the ripples lapped at her trotters, the elephants awash up to their hips, a marmalade cat with one ragged ear clinging to a TV aerial as a pair of parakeets in a wicker cage floated by over what had once been the elementary school gym. He also remembered the endless days in the ark, the miserable food, the seasickness, the smells. When the downpour finally stopped, he sent birds out to see if they could find any dry land anywhere, and he remembered watching them fly away until they were no bigger than fly specks on a window pane, remembered the feeling in his stomach when they finally flew back, having found no place to roost. He remembered especially one of the doves and how, when he saw it returning, he had reached out over the rail and it had landed on the calluses of his upturned palm. With his eyes closed and tears on his cheeks, he had touched his lips to its feathers, and as he felt the panic of its bird's heart, it had seemed to him that the whole world was just as fragile and as doomed. But then, after weeks, another dove came back with a sprig of olive in its beak, and the tops of the mountains began to reappear out of the watery waste, and now at last the great glittering rainbow arched above him. And the great promise echoed in his ears. Never again, God had said. And Noah clung on to those words like a raft in a high sea. With the rainbow tied around his little finger to jog his memory, surely God would never forget what he'd said. No matter what new meanness people might think up, surely the terrible thing would never happen again. As an expert in hoping against hope, the old sailor told himself that the worst was over, and that as sure as God made little green apples, a new green world would blossom up out of the sodden wreckage of the old. He then planted the first vineyard and invented wine. The way he figured it, wine would help him forget the dark past, and if all went well, would be like the champagne at a wedding that you toast the future with. And if all did not go well, if doubts and fears began to gather like rain clouds in his heart, then wine would help him ride out the storm within us. Within, as before, he'd ridden out the 40 days and 40 nights. In the meantime, he would keep his eye on the rainbow and his hand near the corkscrew and try to be fruitful and multiply just the way God had told him and his 7-time great-grandfather Adam before him. Well, Buechner certainly has a way with words, painting a vivid picture, hoping against hope that God is in our midst, remembering God's promises to us to never again destroy the world with a flood, and to always be with us and never to forsake us, to walk with us through the struggles and challenges of our lives, and to never leave us alone. We're grateful for the promises all throughout Scripture and trust in the one who made them to fulfill them. May you find hope and courage this day. Go in peace.